He didn't flinch. He didn't bargain. He just walked through the mud, pulled out $50, and bought a woman the whole town had decided wasn't worth looking at. Nobody understood why a man like Caleb Morgan would do something like that. Nobody asked. But what happened next up in those mountains would change both of them in ways neither of them could have predicted. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 came to Prospect Ridge the way most things did in that part of Wyoming, loud, dirty, and without any apology. The mining camp sat in a wide gulch between two ridges that blocked the wind and trapped the heat, and by the time July settled in full, the place smelled like unwashed men, mule sweat, and creek water gone stagnant. There were maybe 400 people crammed into a stretch of land that should have held half that many, and every one of them had come for the same reason. Silver. The promise of it. The rumor of it. The desperate, bone-grinding hope of it. Most of them would leave with nothing. Caleb Morgan had not come for silver. He came for flour salt, 3 new axe heads, and a coil of good rope. His list was written on the back of an envelope in his own hand, and it was the kind of list that told you everything you needed to know about a man. Nothing on it was frivolous. Nothing on it was indulgent. Every item had a purpose, and the purpose was survival. He rode into Prospect Ridge before 8 in the morning, when the camp was still dragging itself out of the previous night, and he tied his horse, a big gray quarter horse named Cutter, at the post outside Haskell's Supply. He went inside, gave his list to the man behind the counter without a word, and stood with his back against the wall while the order was filled. He was 34 years old, 6'2", wide through the shoulders in the way that came from real work, not vanity. His jaw was heavy and dark, with several days of beard, and his eyes were a shade of brown, so deep they read almost black in low light. He wore a canvas duster despite the heat, and his hat was battered enough that it told its own story about the kind of winters he'd survived. The men in Haskell's gave him room, not because he asked for it, because something in the way he stood made asking unnecessary. He was waiting on his rope when he heard it. Noise. Coming from outside. The particular noise a crowd makes when it has decided something is entertainment. He didn't move toward the window. He had no reason to involve himself in whatever the camp had found to amuse itself with on a Tuesday morning. He'd learned a long time ago that crowds in mining towns were either celebrating a strike or degrading something weaker than themselves, and he had no interest in either. Then he heard the voice. $50. Gentlemen, $50 for the whole package. You don't even have to look at her first. I'll let you say that's a feature, not a flaw. Laughter. A wave of it. Mean and self-satisfied. Caleb's jaw tightened. He paid for his supplies. He stacked them carefully on the counter and told the man he'd be back for them. Then he walked outside. The crowd had gathered in the main thoroughfare, which was nothing more than a wide strip of churned mud between 2 rows of buildings. Maybe 60 men, a handful of women from the saloon watching from the porch, a few boys who'd climbed up on a wagon wheel for a better view. At the center of it was a flatbed wagon. And on the wagon was a woman. She was standing. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Whatever else had been done to her, she was standing. Her hands were bound in front of her with a length of rope that ran down to a stake in the wagon bed. She was wearing a plain dress, dark with mud along the hem, and her feet were bare against the rough planks. And over her head, tied tight at her throat, was a sack. Burlap. The kind used for grain. The kind that let in almost no light. The man selling her was a trader named Birch. Caleb recognized him from the previous summer, a thin, wiry man with a showman's mouth and a predator's eyes. He was working the crowd like he was selling patent medicine, moving his hands, raising his voice, playing to the laughter every time someone shouted something ugly from the back. She came with a wagon train out of Missouri, Birch was announcing. Family situation. Let's just say circumstances changed and she became available. I can't in good conscience tell you she's a beauty. He paused for the laugh he knew was coming, and it came right on schedule. But she's healthy, she's strong, she'll work, And at $50, gentlemen, you're not paying for the face. You're paying for the function. More laughter. Someone threw a clod of mud. It struck her on the shoulder, and she didn't flinch. She just shifted her weight slightly and stood straighter. Caleb stood at the back of the crowd and watched that small movement. She was holding herself upright on purpose. She could feel the mud hit her. She could hear every word being said. She was doing it on purpose, the standing straight, the not flinching, because it was the only form of dignity she had left. Something moved in Caleb's chest, something cold and hard that he didn't have a name for. "Do I have an opening bid?" Birch called out. "Come on, men, $50. That's less than a decent horse, and she won't kick you." Nobody bid, but nobody left either. They were enjoying the spectacle too much to end it. 45? Birch said, his voice losing just a fraction of its confidence. "Come on, $45. She's clean, I'll vouch for that much. Take the sack off and maybe we'll talk," someone shouted. "Yeah, let's see what we're buying." Birch spread his hands in a gesture of elaborate helplessness. "Gentlemen, I told you I can't in good conscience. Can't or won't. What's wrong with her face? She got 2 eyes, 2 ears. What are you hiding?" Birch, the woman on the wagon, hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't reached up toward the sack or turned away from the voices. She just stood there in the heat, hands, bound face hidden, and let them say everything they were going to say. Caleb moved through the crowd. He didn't push. He didn't announce himself. He just walked forward, and the men in front of him moved aside the way water moves around a stone, without choosing to, without understanding why. He stopped at the edge of the wagon, looked up at Birch. "How much?" he said. His voice was flat and unhurried, and carried the kind of quiet that made you listen harder just to make sure you'd heard right. Birch blinked. He recognized Caleb. You didn't forget a man like that, and his expression shifted through several calculations in about 2 seconds. $50, he said. "I heard you the first time." Caleb reached into the inside pocket of his duster and pulled out a folded piece of currency. He didn't count it out. He didn't make a show of it. He just held it up between 2 fingers. $50, and the rope she's standing on. Birch took the money. The crowd went quiet in a way that was different from the quiet before. This was the quiet of people who weren't sure what they were watching anymore. Caleb climbed up onto the wagon in one easy motion. He untied the rope from the stake. He did not take the sack off her head. He did not say anything to her. He jumped back down, and the rope came with him, and the woman, with no choice and no warning, had to step forward or fall. She stepped forward. "Easy," Caleb said. Just that one word, low enough that only she could hear it. He helped her down from the wagon. His hands were around her waist for exactly as long as the step required, and then he let go. "Hey!" someone in the crowd called out. "You gonna take the sack off?" Caleb didn't answer. He turned and walked toward his horse, and the woman walked beside him. Not quite in step. Her bound hands held in front of her. Her bare feet in the mud, and the crowd watched them go and didn't know what to do with what they'd seen. At the post outside Haskell's, Caleb retrieved his supplies and loaded them onto Cutter's saddlebags with efficient, practiced movements. He tied the supply bundle behind the saddle. Then he turned to the woman. "Can you ride?" he asked. A long pause. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected, lower. There was no trembling in it, no immediate gratitude, no panic, just the word. "You'll ride behind me," he said. "It'll be about 4 hours. You need water before we go." Another pause. He could feel her trying to assess him through the burlap, trying to figure out what she was walking into. He understood it. He didn't rush it. "Yes," she said again. He got the canteen from his saddlebag. He hesitated for just a moment, then reached up and loosened the knot at her throat just enough to lift the bottom of the sack. He pressed the canteen into her bound hands. She drank without comment. She handed the canteen back. He tightened the sack. He told himself it was because he didn't want to look at her on the street with the whole town watching. He told himself it was practical. He told himself a lot of things in those 30 seconds. "Step up," he said, and helped her into the saddle. He swung up behind her, took the reins. They rode out of Prospect Ridge at a walk. Nobody stopped them. Nobody followed. A few men watched from the saloon porch, and one of them said something Caleb didn't catch, and somebody else laughed. He didn't look back. They were 2 miles out of camp before either of them spoke. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "Up," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." She didn't respond to that. He felt her shift her weight slightly, and he adjusted. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Men who aren't going to hurt women don't usually buy them," she said. It landed clean. He felt it and said nothing. She was right. He didn't have a good answer for that. He wasn't even sure why he'd done it. He'd walked into Haskell's for flour and rope, and he'd walked out with a woman whose face he hadn't seen, and whose name he didn't know. And somewhere between hearing that crowd laugh and watching her stand straight with mud on her shoulder, he'd made a decision that made no logical sense whatsoever. He was a practical man. He'd built his whole life on practical decisions. This was not one of them. "My name is Caleb Morgan," he said because he owed her that much. A pause. "Evelyn," she said. No last name offered. He didn't push. "Evelyn," he said. "All right." The mountain rose in front of them. The trail narrowed. Cutter moved at a steady pace, unhurried and sure-footed, and the heat of the valley began to give way to the denser, cooler air of the higher elevation as the pines closed in on either side. He did not take the sack off her head. He told himself it was because he didn't have time to deal with whatever was under it. He told himself it was because he needed to focus on the trail. He was a man who was very good at telling himself things. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. Caleb had lived alone long enough that silence didn't unsettle him. He let it sit. Evelyn sat in front of him with her bound hands resting on the saddle horn, and she held herself upright, same as she had on that wagon, and he noticed it again. Whatever she wasn't broken. "The sack," she said finally. "What about it?" "It's hot." He thought about that for a moment. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I haven't decided yet." She went quiet. He could feel the tension in her shoulders. "Decided what?" she asked, and her voice had gone very careful. "Decided what I'm going to do with any of this," he said. "You, the situation, all of it." "You don't know what you're going to do with me," she said, "but you spent $50. It appeared to be the situation that required the $50, he said. "I'll work the rest out." He heard something that might have been a short, disbelieving breath. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't nothing. "That is," she said, "the strangest logic I've ever heard from a man." "Probably," he agreed. The trail switchbacked twice, and then leveled out on a long traverse that cut across the south face of the ridge. Below them the valley was a haze of dust and smoke. Above them the pines thinned into meadow grass and the sky opened up wide and blue and clean. "Are you married?" Evelyn asked. "No." "Were you?" "No." "Then why do you need—" She stopped, started again. "What did you buy me for?" It was a direct question. He owed it a direct answer. "I bought you so Birch couldn't sell you to someone who would have been worse than me," he said. "That's it. That's all I've got." Silence. "And are you?" she asked quietly. "Worse?" "No," he said. "You'll forgive me if I'm not immediately reassured by that." "I'll forgive you," he said. "Yes." Another stretch of trail. A hawk moved in the updrafts, somewhere above them, tilting, adjusting, riding the heat without effort. "The man who had me before," Evelyn said. "Birch. I know Birch. He's going to come after whatever money he thinks he can get," she said. "He's already planning it. He does this, he sells, and then he comes back and tries to renegotiate with the buyer. He'll tell you, 'I'm worth more than you paid.' He'll say there was a misunderstanding. He'll try to frighten you, or leverage you, or both." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He won't come up the mountain," he said. "You sound very sure of that." I am very sure of that. She seemed to weigh that. Why? Because he knows me, Caleb said simply, and he knows better. He felt her take that in. He couldn't see her face, but he felt the slight easing of something in her spine, the smallest, barely perceptible release. How much further? She asked. 2 hours, maybe a little less. He paused. There's water at the top of this next rise. We'll stop. She nodded. At the spring, he helped her down and gave her the canteen again. He watered Cutter. He unwrapped a piece of hard cornbread from his saddlebag and held it out to her. She took it without ceremony and ate it standing with the sack still on her head, lifting it just enough at the bottom the way he'd shown her with the canteen. She didn't complain about the logistics of it. She adapted. He stood a few feet away and watched her without watching her. And he thought about what it meant that she was already adapting, that she was already calculating, that she hadn't spent any of her energy on crying or begging or threatening, that every word out of her mouth since they'd left the camp had been practical and direct. I need to know what you expect from me, she said when she'd finished the bread. Practically speaking, what are you expecting me to do? Work, he said. What kind of work? I've got about 900 acres, he said. Cabin, outbuildings, gardens behind schedule. Roof on the east side of the barn needs work before snow season. I put up meat in the fall and I could use another set of hands for the elk harvest. There's canning to do. Firewood. He paused. It's a working homestead. There's enough to keep 2 people occupied. She was quiet for a moment. And at night. The question landed with a weight he understood immediately. Your own room, he said. Your own space. I'm not... He stopped. Started again. That's not what I bought you for. Men say that, she said evenly. I know they do, he said. I'm not asking you to believe me before you have any reason to. I'm just telling you how it is. She stood there in the heat of the summer afternoon, bare feet on the rocky ground by the spring, a burlap sack over her face, and she thought about it. He could tell she was thinking about it, really thinking, not just making noise. All right, she said finally. All right, he repeated. All right, she said again. I'll work. I'll earn my place. And if you're lying to me about the rest of it... She let the sentence stop there. She didn't finish it. She didn't need to. He found himself thinking that whatever was under that sack, he was increasingly certain it was not what anyone in Prospect Ridge had seemed to think it was. Let's ride, he said. The last stretch of the climb was the steepest. The trail wound through a series of switchbacks so tight that Caleb had to focus, and Evelyn braced against the pitch and angle without complaint. Once going around a particularly sharp turn, she instinctively put her bound hands out against the saddle horn, and her shoulder pressed back into his chest for just a moment before she corrected. Neither of them acknowledged it. The cabin came into view at the top of a long open meadow. It sat against a tree line of tall pines, solid and low to the ground, built with the kind of economy that comes from a man working alone. Behind it, the garden visibly behind schedule exactly as he'd said. To the left, a barn with a dark stain on the east-facing roof where the boards had warped over winter. He'd described it accurately. She would remember that later. When she was trying to figure out whether anything he told her could be trusted, she would remember that every single thing he'd described was exactly what she'd found when they arrived. Caleb dismounted and tied Cutter at the rail. He helped Evelyn down. She stood on solid ground for the first time in hours, and he could see in the way she planted her feet that her legs were unsteady. Take a minute, he said. I'm fine. You've been on a horse for 4 hours with your hands tied and a sack on your head, he said. Take a minute. A pause, then grudgingly, fine. He untied Cutter and led him toward the barn. When he came back, she was standing right where he'd left her. Same posture, hands in front, chin up under the sack. He stopped in front of her. He'd been putting this off for 4 hours. He'd had reasons. They'd all made sense at the time. He wasn't sure any of them made sense now. He reached up, found the knot at her throat. He worked it slowly, giving her time to know what he was doing. The sack came away. He stepped back and looked. Evelyn Hart was standing in the summer light in front of his cabin, and she was looking at him, really looking. Her eyes adjusting after hours in the dark, and her face was. He had expected something that explained the sack. Some visible reason, some marker that justified what Birch had done, what the crowd had done, all of it. Her left cheek carried a scar, long and clean, running from just below her eye to the edge of her jaw. The kind of scar that told a story about something sharp and something deliberate, and a moment that couldn't be undone. It had healed straight and pale, and it had been there long enough to have become simply part of her face. Other than that, she was watching him. Her eyes were clear gray and sharp as winter light, and she was watching him with the precise, controlled stillness of someone who had been through this moment before. The moment of the reveal. The moment of the reaction. She'd done this before. She'd stood and let someone look at her and waited for what came next, and she knew exactly what her face was doing. Nothing, because she'd had a great deal of practice keeping it that way. Caleb stood in the summer light and looked at the scar, and then looked at the rest of her. The gray eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she was holding her shoulders, and what he felt was not what he'd been braced for. He'd been braced to feel whatever the crowd in Prospect Ridge had felt. That reflexive, thoughtless cruelty. He'd been braced to have to override it with reason and decency. He didn't have to override anything. What he felt was something quieter and stranger, the recognition of a person who had survived something hard and come out of it still upright. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but upright. He said, "Are you hungry?" She blinked. Of all the things he might have said, that was clearly not one she'd been preparing for. "Yes," she said. And this time, for the first time, there was something different in her voice. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more complicated than either. Something that sounded like a person recalibrating. "Come inside," he said. "I'll put something together." He turned and went to the door. He heard her follow. Inside the cabin, the evening light came through 2 windows on the west wall and lay in long rectangles across the plank floor. Caleb moved to the stove, added wood, worked with the efficiency of a man who cooked alone and had no interest in performing the task. Evelyn stood near the door and looked around. He didn't look at her while she did it. He let her look. He let her assess the space map, the exits, count the windows, do whatever a person in her position needed to do to feel like they understood where they were. There was a main room with the stove and a rough table and 2 chairs. A door to his right led to the single bedroom his. Against the far wall, a wooden cot that he used when he was working late and didn't want to track mud through the cabin. "That's yours," he said without turning around, gesturing toward the cot. "The cot. Until I can get something better arranged. It won't be long." He set a pan on the stove. "There's a loft above the barn if you'd rather have more separation. Up to you." "I'll take the cot," she said. Her voice was different in here, more contained. The outdoors had given it some room to move. In here she was measuring everything. He put bacon in the pan. It started to hiss and spit. He sliced bread and set it on the edge of the stove to warm. "I need to cut the rope," he said, nodding toward her bound hands. "Where's your knife?" "Don't carry one today," he said. He went to the shelf above the dry sink and retrieved a folding knife, opened it, held it out to her handle first. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned her bound hands toward him. He cut the rope. She brought her hands together, rubbed her wrists. The rope had been on long enough to leave marks, and she looked at those marks for a moment without expression. Then she let her hands fall. "Thank you," she said. It was a plain statement, no performance in it. "Do you want to wash up?" he asked. "There's a basin, water in the barrel by the door." She went to it without waiting for further instruction. She washed her hands and her face and the back of her neck. She did it with the focus of someone who genuinely needed it and didn't waste any time being self-conscious about doing it in front of him. He put the food on the table. Bacon, warm bread, 2 cups of coffee. They sat across from each other in the evening light. She ate. He ate. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The garden, she said finally around a piece of bread. What's in it? Potatoes, he said. Beans, squash. Behind about 3 weeks. Why? Got tied up with the east wall of the barn in May, then the creek flooded one of the lower beds. Lost time. She nodded. I know how to garden, she said. And I know how to put up a roof. He glanced up. Don't look surprised, she said. I'm not, he said, though maybe he was a little. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, she said. Before she stopped. Before the situation changed. He didn't push on the situation. He had his own situations he didn't discuss. He extended her the same courtesy he'd want extended to himself. I'll show you where everything is in the morning, he said. Tools, supplies, where I keep things. You'll need to know all of it. She looked at him steadily. You're really going to let me know where you keep everything? You're going to be working here, he said. You need to know where the tools are. Most men in your position, she said carefully, wouldn't be comfortable with that. Most men in my position, he said, shouldn't have put themselves in this position to begin with. A pause. No, she said. They shouldn't have. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. Outside, the summer darkness was complete, and the mountain was quiet in the particular way of high places, not silent, but layered and textured with the sounds of things that belonged there. Caleb collected the plates. He washed them in the basin same as he always did. There's a spare blanket in the chest under the window, he said. If you need anything in the night. He paused. I sleep light. Don't be quiet about it. Just say something. She was watching him from the table with those gray eyes. Caleb Morgan, she said. That's me. Why? She said. The actual reason. Not what you said on the trail. I understand that you were answering the question you could answer then. But why? He set the last plate on the shelf. He stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the wall. Then he turned around. Because you were standing straight, he said. She didn't say anything. In the mud, he said. With the sack on, and the crowd saying what they were saying, and somebody threw something at you. And you stood straight. And He stopped, looked for the words. He was not a man who had them readily available. I didn't want to see what happened to a person who was still standing straight. The lamp on the table threw a warm circle of light that didn't quite reach the corners of the room. Evelyn sat in it and looked at him, and something crossed her face that he couldn't read. Something complicated and quiet, and not quite what he would have called an emotion, but something adjacent to one. Good night, Mr. Morgan, she said. Good night, Miss Evelyn, he said. He went to his room and closed the door. He lay on his back in the dark for a long time before sleep came, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of another person settling into the cabin. The creak of the cot. The soft sound of the chest being opened. A silence that was different from his usual silence, occupied, textured, inhabited. He'd bought a woman today for $50 and a piece of rope. He had no idea what he'd actually gotten, but for the first time in a very long time, he found himself thinking that perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. He was already up when she woke. She could hear him outside, the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood, steady and unhurried the same way he did everything. She lay on the cot for a moment and listened to it and let herself feel the strangeness of waking up somewhere that wasn't a wagon or a dirt floor or a locked room. The blanket was rough but clean, the cot held, the cabin smelled like pine resin and wood smoke and coffee. Coffee. She sat up. There was a pot on the stove still warm. He'd left a cup on the table. She stood, rolled her shoulders, took stock of herself the way she'd trained herself to do every morning for the past 8 months, not dwelling, just assessing. Wrists were stiff, but the rope marks were already fading. Feet were cut from the bare walk through the mining camp. Nothing serious. Nothing that would slow her down. She poured the coffee, drank it standing by the window. Outside, Caleb was at the splitting block. He worked without looking up, without any of the self-consciousness of a man who knew he was being watched. The axe came down clean every time, stack growing on his left. She watched him for exactly as long as it took to finish the coffee. Then she set the cup down and went to find her boots. They weren't where she'd left them. They were by the stove. Dried out, the mud brushed off the worst of the cracking, and the leather worked over with what looked like lard. He'd done it sometime in the night or first thing in the morning, and he hadn't mentioned it. She stood there and looked at the boots for a moment. Then she put them on and went outside. He heard the door and looked up. He didn't stop working. "Coffee's on the stove." "I found it," she said. "Thank you." He nodded, set the axe in the block, picked up the split wood, and added it to the stack. "I want to see the garden," she said. "It's behind the cabin, east side." "I know which direction east is," she said. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face and was gone before it committed to anything. "Right," he said. "It is." She walked around this cabin. He followed a few steps back and stood at the edge of the garden while she walked through it. She crouched down beside the bean rows, ran her fingers through the soil, checked the moisture and the consistency, stood up, looked at the spacing, looked at the squash hills, the potato mounds. "You didn't thin the beans," she said. "I know. You've got too many plants fighting for the same water. You'll lose half of them before August if you don't fix it." "I know," he said again. "I ran short on time." "You keep saying that." She looked at him. "What did you do with all your time?" "Kept myself alive," he said. "It takes more time than people think." She looked at the garden another moment. "I'll start here this morning," she said. "I'll need the hand fork and the trowel and water." "Barrel's on the north side." "I'll find it." She found it. She found the tools in the shed attached to the side of the barn, organized with the same spare logic as everything else. He owned a place for each thing, and each thing in its place. She took what she needed and went back to the garden and started working. He checked on her once around mid-morning and didn't say anything. Just looked at what she'd done, nodded once, and went back to whatever he was doing on the barn roof. She could hear him up there. The scrape and knock of boards being pulled, nails being set. He worked in the same rhythm as everything else, steady, no waste. By noon, she'd thinned. The beans turned the squash hills, pulled the worst of the weeds from the potato rows, and retrenched two of the lower beds that had silted in from the spring flood. When she came around to the front of the cabin, Caleb was already there. He'd put food on the table, bread, cold elk meat, pickled something from a jar. No ceremony. He sat down when she sat down. She ate. He ate. "You know what you're doing," he said, which was not a question. "I told you I did," she said. "Most people say things," he said. "Not everyone means them." She looked at him. "I don't say things I don't mean." "I'm starting to understand that," he said. They ate in silence for a while. "The roof," she said. "East side. How bad? 3 boards need full replacement. The rest is resealing." "I can help with the resealing." He looked at her. "You said you know how to do a roof." "I said I know how to put one up," she said. "Resealing is easier than that." "You're not afraid of heights." "I'm afraid of plenty of things," she said evenly. "Heights aren't one of them." He seemed to think about that. Not the answer about heights, but the admission that she was afraid of anything. Like it was a more honest thing than he'd expected. "After lunch," he said. They worked the roof through the afternoon. She handled pitch and brush while he positioned and nailed the new boards, and they moved around each other on the slope with a careful, unspoken negotiation of space. He handed her things when she needed them. She pointed out a seam he'd missed on the far edge, and he went back to it without argument. Once she misjudged a step and lurched sideways, and his hand caught her elbow before she'd fully registered she was falling. He let go the instant she had her footing back. "Thank you," she said. He said, already back to his work. She stood there for just a moment longer than necessary, her elbow where his hand had been. Then she went back to the pitch. It was late afternoon when the sound of a horse reached them. Both of them heard it at the same moment. She felt the change in Caleb before she saw it, a tightening, a stilling, a shift in the way he held himself. "Stay up here," he said quietly, "Who is it?" "Stay up here," he said again. He was already moving to the edge of the roof. She stayed, but she watched. The man who rode into the yard was not Birch. He was younger, rougher looking, with a canvas coat and a rifle across his saddle that he wasn't making any effort to be subtle about. He pulled up at the rail and looked at the cabin. "Morgan," he called. "You up there?" Caleb dropped off the roof edge and landed in the yard. She hadn't even seen him move. One moment he was beside her, and then he was down there, and his feet hit the ground, and he straightened up and faced the man on the horse. "I'm here," Caleb said. "State your business." "Name's Foley," the man said. "I ride for Birch." "I figured," Caleb said. "Mr. Birch says there was a misunderstanding yesterday," Foley said, "regarding the woman." "There wasn't. He says the transaction wasn't complete. Says he had some conditions that weren't communicated." "He didn't," Caleb said. $50, no conditions. Transaction complete." Foley shifted in the saddle. His hand wasn't on the rifle, but it was close to it. "Mr. Birch is prepared to refund your $50 and call it square," he said. "He just wants her back." "She's not a her to be wanted back," Caleb said. "She's a person who isn't going anywhere." Foley's jaw tightened. "Mr. Birch thought you might say something like that. He asked me to communicate that his patience is limited." "Foley," Caleb said. His voice hadn't changed, hadn't gotten louder or harder. It was exactly the same as it always was, low, unhurried, and carrying the particular weight of a man who had absolutely no doubt about what he'd do if the situation required it. "You ride back to Birch, and you tell him the transaction was legal. The woman is not available, and if he sends anyone up this mountain again, I will come down myself and explain my position in terms he'll understand for the rest of his life." Foley looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked up at the roof. He found her there, and they looked at each other across the yard. Evelyn held his gaze. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched him with the same flat, steady look she'd used on the crowd in Prospect Ridge, the one that didn't give anything away. Foley looked back at Caleb. "She's got a temper on her, Birch says." "Good," Caleb said. The man wheeled his horse and rode out of the yard without another word. Caleb stood watching until the sound of hooves faded down the trail. Then he turned and looked up at the roof. "You all right?" he called. "Fine," she said. "Come down when you're ready." She finished the section she was on, sealed the last edge, set the brush down on the shingles. Then she climbed down. Her heart was going faster than it should have been. She knew it. She pressed it back down where it belonged. "He'll come back," she said when she reached the ground. "Not Foley. Birch himself probably. Or someone worse." "Maybe," Caleb said. "You don't seem worried." "I'm not," he said. "That's either confidence or foolishness," she said. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside," he said. She looked at him sharply. He looked back at her without apology, and for just a moment she thought she caught something in those dark eyes, not quite amusement, but something related to it. Something that surprised her more than the horse and the rifle had. "Come on," he said. "I'll put supper together." That night was different from the first. The first night had been about establishing territory, who was where, what the rules were, what the shape of things would be. This night was something else. They were past the initial strangeness. They weren't comfortable exactly, but the acute tension of strangers in the same space had shifted into something more textured. He cooked. She sat at the table and sorted dried beans into a bowl, pulling out the damaged ones, and they talked, not about the important things, not yet, but about practical things that were somehow the foundation of the important things. "You'll need shoes," he said. "Better ones. The boots will do for now, but when it gets cold—" "It's July," she said. "It's July now," he said. "September comes fast up here." She looked at him. "You plan ahead." "I plan for everything," he said. "It's the only way to survive a winter at this elevation." "Is that why you're already talking about September?" "I'm already thinking about February," he said. "September is practically tomorrow." She sorted beans for a moment. "You've been alone up here a long time," she said. It wasn't a question. "Long enough," he said. "How long?" He stirred the pot. 6 years. She let that sit there. 6 years. She tried to imagine it. Tried to imagine choosing it. Why? Because the alternative was being around people, he said, and the people I'd been around hadn't left me with a high opinion of the arrangement. She almost smiled. She felt it start and held it back. "I understand that," she said. "I thought you might," he said. They ate. And then in the quiet after eating something happened that she hadn't expected. He told her a story, not about himself or not directly. He told her about the mountain, about a winter 3 years back when the snow had come in October and not stopped until March, and about the elk that had sheltered in his south meadow for 2 weeks during the worst of it, because they had nowhere else to go, and about how he'd gotten up every morning and gone out to check on them, and they'd stopped running from him after about a week. He told it quietly without any narrative ambition, just setting one word after another, and she sat across the table and listened. And what she was listening to wasn't really the story about the elk. What she was listening to was the fact that he was telling her a story at all, that he was doing the thing humans do when they begin to let someone into the space around them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked when he finished. He considered the question. "Because it came to mind," he said. "And because you've been in your own head all day, and I thought it might help to hear someone else's for a while." She didn't know what to do with that. It was such a plain, decent thing to say that she didn't have a mechanism for it. All her mechanisms were built for other kinds of men. "Tell me about the farm," he said. "Missouri." She shook her head. "All right," he said immediately. No push, no follow-up. She sat with the refusal for a moment. Then she said, "It wasn't the farm that was the problem. The farm was good. It was what happened after the farm. You don't have to." "I know I don't," she said. "I'm deciding whether I want to." He waited. "My father died," she said. 4 years ago, fever. After that it was just me and my brother, he had debts. Gambling debts. The kind that don't go away because you want them to." She paused. "I thought he'd sold the farm. I thought the debts were the farm. It took me 6 months after to find out that the farm wasn't all he'd sold." Caleb was very still on the other side of the table. "Birch," he said. "A man who worked with Birch," she said. "It's a business. They move women like freight. Find ones who don't have family to come looking, ones who can't prove anything, ones who—" She stopped, looked at the table, looked back up. "It's been 8 months. I've been in 4 different places. This is the first time I've been—" She looked around the cabin, in somewhere with a door that isn't locked. Caleb said nothing, but his jaw had gone very hard. "The scar," she said, because she understood that it was the thing that hadn't been addressed yet, the thing sitting in the middle of the room. One of the men along the way didn't like being told no. She said it matter-of-factly in the same tone she might use to describe a bad harvest. "It's been a year. It's healed." "Evelyn," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't feel sorry for me. I've spent 8 months watching what pity does, and it doesn't do anything useful. I'd rather you just—" She searched for the word, "just keep letting me work." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They sat in the quiet. "My father left me the farm," he said suddenly. She looked up. "Back in Ohio," he said. "He left me the farm and I didn't want it. I wanted—" He stopped, exhaled through his nose. "I wanted something that wasn't already decided. Something I built myself. So I left. And my brother took the farm and ran it into the ground in 3 years. And my father's been dead for 11, and I haven't been back." He paused. "I'm not saying it's the same thing." "It isn't," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't. I'm saying I understand something about the mechanics of leaving and what it costs and how you carry it." She looked at him across the table, the lamp between them, the quiet mountain outside. "You're a strange man, Caleb Morgan," she said. "I've been told," he said. She stood up, began collecting the plates. "Leave them," he said. "I'll wash them," she said. "It's my cabin," he said. "I'll wash them." She set the plate back down and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Then she sat back down. He washed the dishes. She watched him do it. "The potatoes need a second turning," she said. "I'll do it tomorrow morning before it gets hot." "Beans need water," he said. "I know. I'll do those first. The lower beds are still uneven from the flood damage. I'll fix them Thursday," she said. "The resealing on the barn roof needs one more pass on the north ridge." "Friday," he said. "Rain Thursday." She looked at him. "How do you know that—" "Wind's been coming from the northwest since morning," he said, "and the birds were low all afternoon." She stared at him. "You read weather from birds." "And other things," he said. "It rains Thursday. Plan for it." She shook her head slowly. "All right," she said. "Friday for the roof." He dried the last dish, set it on the shelf, turned around and leaned against the dry sink and looked at her. "The man Foley," he said. "Did you recognize him from before? From any of the places?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "But I didn't get a long look at most of the men Birch used." "If you do recognize someone," he said, "you tell me, immediately. Whether I'm on the roof or in the field or in the middle of something else. You find me and you tell me. Understood?" She looked at him steadily. "You're not going to tell me to hide in the cabin if someone comes." "Why would I do that?" he said. "Because most men—" "I'm not most men," he said. "Not boasting, just a statement." She looked at him for a long moment. "Understood," she said. He nodded. "Good night, Miss Evelyn." "Good night, Mr. Morgan." He went to his room. She sat at the table a little longer in the lamplight, with her hands flat on the wood and her eyes on the door. She was sorting through things the way she sorted beans, pulling out what was damaged, setting aside what could still be used, trying to figure out what she was actually looking at. 8 months, 4 places. And she'd learned to read a situation fast because reading it wrong had consequences. She'd learned to measure men in the first 30 seconds because she didn't get second chances. She had been measuring Caleb Morgan since he'd stepped through the crowd in Prospect Ridge. She hadn't figured him out yet. That she realized was itself a piece of information. Every other man she'd encountered in 8 months she'd had figured out within the hour. The type, the game, the thing they actually wanted underneath the thing they said they wanted. Caleb Morgan, she did not have figured out. And what alarmed her, what she would not have admitted to him or to anyone but what she sat with in the quiet of his cabin, was that she was not certain she wanted to figure him out. That not knowing felt for the first time in a very long time like something other than danger. She blew out the lamp. She lay down on the cot. She did not sleep for a while. But when she did, she slept without waking, which was its own kind of miracle, and the mountain breathed around the cabin in the dark, and the summer night was very still. On Thursday it rained. Exactly as he'd said. She was in the garden when it started a fat-dropped summer rain that came on fast from the northwest, and she grabbed the tools and ran for the shed and made it before she was completely soaked. She stood in the shed doorway and watched the rain come down in sheets across the meadow. Caleb appeared from the direction of the barn at a walk. Not running, just walking through the rain, like it was a minor inconvenience he'd already accounted for. She watched him cross the yard. He stopped under the shed's overhang beside her. Water ran off the brim of his hat. "You walked through that," she said. "I was already wet," he said. "From what Truff needed fixing," he said. "The connection to the barn barrel." She looked at him. He was thoroughly soaked. "Did you fix it?" "Yes," he said. She shook her head. She turned back to the rain. They stood side by side under the overhang and watched it fall. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "Anything," she said. "You're good at that, telling things." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a cave on the north face," he said. "About 2 miles up. There's drawings on the wall, old ones. I don't know who made them before white men, before the mines, a long time before any of it. Animals, mostly. But one of them—" He paused. "One of them looks like two people standing next to each other. Just shapes, just marks, but side by side." She looked at him. "I go up there sometimes," he said, "when I need to remember that people have been figuring out how to be next to each other for a very long time." She was quiet for a long moment. "You surprise me," she said. "Constantly." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said. "It is one," she said. The rain eased off around noon. By mid-afternoon the sky was washed and clean, and the meadow grass was lit up vivid and green in the returning sun, and the mountains smelled like wet pine and turned earth. Evelyn was back in this garden by 3 o'clock. She was replanting a section of the lower bed that the rain had shifted, working in the rich wet soil with her bare hands, because the gloves Caleb had given her were already soaked through when she heard the horse. 2 horses this time. Her hands stilled in the dirt. She stood up slowly. Turned. Birch. He came into the yard on a brown gelding, and the man beside him was not. Foley was someone bigger, someone who sat in the saddle, the way a man sits when he's expecting to use himself as a physical argument. Caleb came out of the barn before Birch reached the rail. He'd heard them too. He always heard everything. Evelyn stayed where she was at the edge of the garden. She didn't retreat toward the cabin. She didn't hide. She planted her feet in the wet soil and stood. Birch pulled up and looked at Caleb with the particular expression of a man who has decided to perform reasonableness. "Morgan," he said. "Good of you to come out." "State your business, Birch," Caleb said. "I think you know my business," Birch said. His eyes moved to Evelyn, and he smiled. The smile was the kind that made her hands curl at her sides. "Miss Hart, you're looking well. Mountain air agrees with you." She said nothing. "Birch," Caleb said. "Look at me." Birch's eyes came back to him. Something flickered in them. "Now, Morgan, there's no need for—" "You're on my land," Caleb said. "You were told not to come back. The transaction was legal and complete. You have no claim here. State your business or turn your horse around." "The thing is," Birch said, and he was still using the reasonable voice, the salesman's voice, "there's a matter of paperwork that was never filed properly. See, in the territory, there's a requirement for documentation of transfer of—" "There is no such requirement," Caleb said. Birch blinked. "I know the territorial statutes," Caleb said. "There is no documentation requirement for any transaction of the kind you're describing, because the kind of transaction you're describing is not recognized as legal in the first place." Birch's reasonable face shifted into something more honest. "Now listen." "No," Caleb said. "You listen. You came to my land. You threatened my property and my household. If you leave now, we're done. If you press this further in any form through any intermediary, by any means, I will write a letter to the territorial marshal detailing everything I know about your operation. And I know quite a lot, Birch. I've been living in this valley for 6 years, and I have seen more of what you do than you know." The big man beside Birch moved. Just a shift, a repositioning, an advertisement of intent. Caleb looked at him. "Son," he said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "You are not the first large man who has had an idea about me. I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to finish that idea." The big man stopped moving. Evelyn stood in the wet garden soil and watched Birch run through his calculations. She'd watched him do it before in other places with other men. He was adding up odds, measuring the distance between what he wanted and what it would cost. She watched him decide. "You're making an enemy, Morgan," Birch said. "I've got others," Caleb said. "Ride out." Birch looked at her one more time. She met his eyes. She let him see because she wanted him to see that there was nothing in her face that he could use, no fear he could leverage, no hope she was hiding that he could threaten. 8 months of his world had not broken her, and this mountain and this man had given her back something she hadn't known she'd put down. She looked at him, and she did not look away. Birch turned his horse. The two of them rode out of the yard and down the trail, and the sound of their horses faded and then was gone. Caleb stood at the rail until he was certain they were off the land. Then he turned. Evelyn was still standing in the garden. "You should have gone inside," he said. "No," she said. "I shouldn't have." He looked at her. A long look. "He needs to know I'm not hiding," she said. "If he thinks I'm afraid enough to hide, he'll keep coming. He needs to know that I'm here, and I'm not behind a door, and I'm not flinching." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "That's a risk," he said. "Most true things are," she said. He came toward her, stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, really looked the way he'd been careful not to do too directly since the first evening, and she let him look. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Evelyn." "I said yes," she said. Her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way, but she kept it. "I've been standing in front of Birch for 8 months. One more time in an open yard in the sunlight was not the hardest thing I've done this week." He accepted that. He didn't press it. "Come and eat something," he said. "I need to finish the lower bed first." "It'll keep. The soil's right now from the rain," she said. "It won't be right tomorrow. Give me an hour." He looked at her, then he looked at the garden. "I'll help," he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. "You don't need to. 1 set of hands, it takes an hour," he said. 2 sets, it takes 30 minutes. He moved toward the shed. "I'll get the other fork." She watched him go. She crouched down and put her hands back into the soil. She didn't examine what she was feeling. She just put her hands in the dirt and worked. He came back with the fork and started on the far side of the bed. They worked toward each other from opposite ends, turning and smoothing and repacking, and they didn't talk. The late afternoon light lay warm across the meadow. A hawk circled high above the tree line, the same one or a different one riding the same updrafts. When they met in the middle of the bed, they were close enough that she could see the dried mud on the back of his hands from the trough work earlier. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. "What you said to Birch," she said. "About writing to the territorial marshal. The letter. Do you actually know enough to—" "Yes," he said. "How?" "Because I've been watching what he does in this valley for 3 years," he said. "I didn't know anyone had paid close enough attention to act on it. Now someone will." She looked at him. "You're going to write the letter," she said. "You weren't threatening him. You're actually going to do it." "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll ride down to the postal agent at Miller's Crossing." She sat back on her heels. She looked at the evening coming across the meadow, and she thought about 8 months of being moved from place to place, and the women she'd been moved alongside who were still there wherever there was. Who didn't have a Caleb Morgan? "There were others," she said. "There are others, still in it." "I know," he said. "I'll include everything I know about all of it." She nodded. She turned back to the soil. They finished the bed. The sun was low when they put the tools away, and the first stars were beginning to show above the eastern ridge, and the mountain settled into its evening sounds around them. She washed her hands at the rain barrel. He washed his beside her. "Thank you," she said, "for the garden." He said. "And for tea," she paused, "for today." He looked sideways at her. "I just fixed a trough and chased off a snake," he said. She almost laughed. It was the closest she'd come in 8 months to actually laughing, and it startled her enough that she pressed her hand over her mouth. He looked at her. His expression did the thing where it was almost something, and then wasn't, and she had the sudden thought that he was doing the same thing she was doing, holding back, holding back, holding back, because neither of them knew yet what would happen if they stopped. "Come on," he said. They went inside, and the mountain closed around the cabin in the gathering dark, and somewhere below them in the valley, Birch was riding back to Prospect Ridge with nothing he'd come for. And somewhere in the cabin behind her, she could hear Caleb moving at the stove, and Evelyn Hart stood at the window with her hand pressed flat against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat, and thought something is changing. She wasn't sure yet whether it was her, or both of them. But something was. The letter took him 2 hours to write. She knew because she was up before dawn working the garden, and she heard him at the table inside the scratch of pen on paper. The pause, the scratch again. And by the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge and she came in to wash her hands, he was folding it into an envelope with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that what he'd just put down on paper was going to set something in motion that couldn't be undone. He looked up when she came in. "It's done," he said. "All of it. Everything I know," he said. "Names, dates, locations. The women I saw moved through the valley. The men who worked with Birch. The trader out of Cheyenne who handles the money end of it." He set the envelope on the table. "It's enough. More than enough if the marshal is worth his badge." She stood across the table and looked at the envelope. She thought about the women she'd shared wagon beds with, the ones who'd stopped talking after a while, the ones who'd learned to take up less and less space. "There was a woman named Clara," she said, "from Illinois. She had a little girl with her, 6 years old. They separated them in a town called Redfield. I don't know where either of them went." Caleb picked up the pen, opened the envelope back up. "Tell me everything you remember about Clara," he said. She sat down. She told him. He added 2 more pages to the letter. He rode down to Miller's Crossing after breakfast and was back by midday, and he didn't say much about the postal agent or the ride except that the letter was sent and they would have to wait. She didn't push for more. She understood that some things required patience, and patience was something she'd had to learn in the hardest possible school. What she hadn't expected was the waiting itself to change things between them. It was subtle at first. The letter had cracked something open, or maybe it was the telling the act of sitting across the table and saying Clara's name out loud to someone who wrote it down like it mattered. Whatever it was, something in Evelyn had shifted, and she couldn't entirely put it back. She found herself watching him more, not with suspicion, which had been her first mode and still lived in her somewhere like a banked fire. Something different, something she didn't have a clean name for. He moved through the world with such absolute economy. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. She'd known men who worked hard, and men who made sure you knew they were working hard, and Caleb Morgan was entirely the first kind. He fixed the east water trough, reinforced the south fence line, where 3 posts had gone soft over winter, rebuilt the shelving unit in the shed that had collapsed under the weight of the seed bags. And he did all of it the same way, quietly and completely, without announcing the start or the finish. She started doing the same. Not mirroring him, she'd always worked that way. Efficiency over show, but becoming conscious of it as something they shared. A shared language before they had the spoken one. On a Wednesday morning, 11 days after Birch's visit, she was in the loft of the barn, looking for the spare seed packets Caleb had mentioned when she found the box. It was wooden, small, tucked behind a beam. She almost didn't open it. She almost respected it as none of her business. She opened it. Inside a photograph. A woman and a boy formal portrait, the kind taken in a studio. The woman was standing with her hand on the boy's shoulder, and they were both looking at the camera with the slightly stiff expressions of people who weren't used to being photographed. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that wasn't Caleb's, Thomas, age 7, March 1880. She put it back exactly as she'd found it. Climbed down from the loft. Went back to the garden and dug for an hour without stopping. At dinner that night, she looked at him across the table and thought, there are whole rooms in this man I haven't been in yet. She thought that's true of everyone. She thought it feels different with him, because I want to know what's in them. That thought alarmed her enough that she excused herself early and went to bed. She didn't sleep. "Who's Thomas?" she asked the next morning. He was pouring coffee. His hand didn't stop. He set the pot down. He turned around. She watched his face do something complicated and controlled. "My nephew," he said. "My brother's son." She waited. "He died," Caleb said. "The winter of 80. He was 7. My brother's farm had a bad year and they couldn't—" He stopped. "I wasn't there. I'd already come west. I didn't know until spring when the letter caught up with me." She was quiet. I keep the photograph because he's the one thing from that life I don't want to forget, he said. Everything else I was glad to put down, not him. She thought about the 6 years of solitude. The cabin built by one pair of hands. The list at Haskell's Supply, with nothing frivolous on it. She thought about a man who had peeled away everything that wasn't essential and ended up in a high meadow with a photograph in a box in the loft, and she understood something about him that she hadn't understood before. "I'm sorry," she said, "for looking." "Don't be," he said. "You were looking for seed packets." "I was," she said. He handed her the coffee cup. Their fingers didn't touch. He poured his own and sat down. "His mother," she said carefully. "In the photograph." "My sister-in-law," he said. "Ruth, she remarried. I hear she's in Oregon now." He paused. "She was good to him. She's good." She nodded. They drank their coffee. "I've never told anyone that," he said about 30 seconds later. "About Thomas." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "I know," she said. "How do you know?" "Because you said it the way people say things they've been carrying alone," she said. "There's a particular sound to it." He looked at her, really looked. "You hear that?" "I've said enough things that way myself," she said. "I recognize the sound." He nodded once, slowly, like something had been confirmed. They went out to work. That afternoon brought the first real trouble. Not Birch, something more immediate and more dangerous. She was on the east side of the garden when she heard Caleb shout. Not a word, just a sharp, urgent sound, the kind that carried meaning without language. She dropped the trowel and ran. He was at the near fence line on the ground. The gray horse cutter was a few feet away, moving nervous and short-stepped, and Caleb was sitting in the dirt with his right arm pressed against his side and blood showing dark through his shirt. She ran the last 20 yards. "What happened?" she said, already crouching beside him. "Wire," he said. His voice was tight. "Old fence post went over. Rusted wire came up." He looked at his side. "It's not deep. I can—" "Don't," she said. She pulled his hand away. She looked at the wound, a long ragged tear along the right side of his rib cage. Not deep enough to be internal, but deep enough to bleed heavily, and wide enough to require more than a cloth pressed against it. "Come to the cabin," she said. "I can walk," he said. "I know you can walk," she said. "I'm not carrying you. Come to the cabin." He got up. He walked. She walked beside him, with her hand just behind his elbow, not holding, just present, and he didn't say anything about it. Inside, she sat him in the chair by the stove. She found the medicine box on the shelf above the dry sink. She'd cataloged everything in the first week. She knew exactly where everything was, and she pulled out what she needed. Carbolic, needle and thread, clean cloth. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "Take your shirt off." He did. She didn't look at anything except the wound. She cleaned it with carbolic, and he hissed once through his teeth and went silent. She examined the edges, determined it needed 4 stitches to close properly, and threaded the needle. "You've done this before," he said. "Yes," she said. "On yourself or someone else?" "Both," she said. "Hold still." She stitched the wound with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything, 4 clean stitches, even tension tied off properly. He held still through the whole of it. When she was done, she pressed clean cloth against it and wrapped it with a strip of bandage. "Done," she said. He looked down at the dressing. Then he looked at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice had something different in it. The careful distance that he kept in it as a matter of practice had slipped a fraction. She was still kneeling at his level, her hands wrapped in the cloth she'd been working with, and they were closer than they'd been before, not by choice, exactly. By the logic of wound care, and she could see the line of exhaustion around his eyes, and the set of his jaw, and the way his breathing had evened out, now that the worst of it was over. She stood up, took a step back. "You need to rest it for at least 2 days, she said. "The stitches won't hold if you're pulling the muscle." 2 days is 2 days, she said. "I'll manage the outside work." "Evelyn, I have been managing outside work since I was 11 years old," she said. "2 days. Don't argue with me about things I know." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "All right." She turned away to clean up the supplies. Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of them for it. It was only later in the quiet of the evening, with him reading at the table and her sewing a tear in her work shirt, that she let herself acknowledge what she'd noticed when she was kneeling beside him, working close enough to see his face clearly. She'd been frightened, genuinely frightened. Not of the wound she'd seen worse, but for him. For a moment in the meadow, running toward where he'd gone down, she had felt something cold go through her that wasn't professional concern, and wasn't the practical anxiety of someone losing the person who kept them alive. It had been personal. She sewed the tear in her shirt and pretended she didn't know what that meant. The 2 days of rest lasted exactly 1 day and a half. On the second afternoon, he came out of the cabin without asking permission and started on the fence repair, slowly favoring his right side. She saw him through the garden and put her hands on her hips. "You said 2 days," she called. "I said all right," he called back. "I didn't say I agreed." She stared at him across the meadow. "If you tear those stitches," she called, "I'm not doing them again." "Yes, you are," he called back. She opened her mouth, closed it, turned back to the garden. She heard something that sounded like a short, low laugh from the direction of the fence line. That was the moment she stopped being able to pretend she didn't know what was happening. That sound, that rare private thing, had done what the stitching and the barn and the coffee and the letter and the drawing on the cave wall and the name Thomas had been building toward without her permission. It had landed in the center of her chest and stayed there, warm and slightly painful, like blood returning to a numb limb. She was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind she hadn't accounted for. She looked at the mountains, and she breathed, and she told herself to be sensible. She told herself to catalog the facts. She was a woman with no legal standing, no money, no family, and a scar on her face, living on a man's property, under an arrangement that had no formal protection. She told herself that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She told herself all the things she'd spent 8 months telling herself to stay alive, and then she heard him say something quiet to the fence post he was resetting just to himself, something dry and dismissive about the quality of the wire, and she felt it again, that warm, painful pressure, and she understood that the telling herself things was not going to be as effective as it used to be. That evening, he asked her to come look at something. She followed him up the slope behind the cabin. The sun was low, and the air had the particular golden quality of a summer evening at elevation, and he led her through the trees to a clearing she hadn't found on her own yet. From the clearing, the whole valley was visible. Prospect Ridge, a smear of dust and smoke in the distance. The green ribbon of the creek. The ranges beyond ranges, layering off into the haze, blue and gray and violet. She stood beside him and looked at it. "I come here when I need to remember how small things are," he said. "The mining camps, the people in them. All of it. From up here, it's just..." He moved his hand. "Just a small fire in a very big dark." "That's either comforting or terrible," she said. "Some days one way," he said. "Some days the other." She looked at Prospect Ridge. From here she could not see the wagon, the mud, the crowd, any of it. It was just a dim shape, something that existed at a distance. "I used to be afraid of wide open spaces," she said. "After I came west, I'd been in closed spaces so long, wagons, rooms that open felt dangerous, like there was nothing to hold on to. And now," he said. She looked at the valley. She thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned to think about things. "Now it feels like room," she said. He looked at her. "To be," she said. "Just room. To be something." He was quiet for a moment. The evening wind moved through the pines. "You can stay," he said. She looked at him. "I mean..." He stopped, started again, and she could see him working for the right shape of it. This man who chose his words with such deliberate care. "The arrangement as it stands. I know it started wrong. I know I don't have the right to..." He paused. I know what I did at that camp looked like one thing and maybe still looks like that thing, and I'm not asking you to call it something different. But you can stay, as long as you need to, on whatever terms make sense for you. Not because I bought you, because you choose to." She stood very still. "What if I choose to go?" she said. Not because she wanted to, because she needed to know. "Then I'd get Cutter saddled and make sure you had enough money to get wherever you were going," he said. "And I'd want to know you got there safe." She looked at him for a long time. "You'd do that," she said. "Yes," he said. "Without me?" "Yes," he said. "Without anything." She turned back to the valley. She pressed her thumbnail against the pad of her finger. She breathed. "I don't want to go," she said. Very quietly, like she was telling the mountains more than telling him. He didn't respond immediately. She appreciated that he didn't respond immediately. "All right," he said finally, same way he always said it. Like the word meant something specific to him. Like it was a commitment, not just a sound. They stood there as the light went. Neither of them moved toward the other, and neither of them moved away, and the comfortable distance between them felt different now. Not like a gap to be managed, but like a space that had been agreed upon, that they were both choosing. They walked back to the cabin in the early dark, and he made supper, and she set the table, and they ate, and the ordinary rhythm of it felt different. Not because anything about the actions had changed, because both of them knew something now that they hadn't said out loud and hadn't needed to. 3 days later, a rider came up the mountain. Not Birch, not Foley, not anyone she recognized, not anyone. He was official looking in a way that Caleb's usual visitors were not: a clean coat, a badge on his chest that caught the morning light, a horse that had been properly cared for. He pulled up at the rail and took off his hat and said, "I'm looking for Caleb Morgan." Caleb had come out of the barn. "That's me," he said. "Deputy Marshal Hendricks," the man said. "Out of Cheyenne. I'm here in response to a letter filed with the marshal's office." He looked at Evelyn where she'd stopped at the edge of the garden. "Would you be Evelyn Hart, ma'am?" She walked toward them. "I would," she said. Hendricks nodded. "Ma'am, your letter? Mr. Morgan's letter was received 3 weeks ago. I've been in the territory since. Based on what was detailed, we've already apprehended Birch and 2 of his associates in Prospect Ridge." He paused. "We also located a woman traveling with a child, matching the description of Clara Beaumont. She and her daughter are in protective custody in Cheyenne." The ground shifted under Evelyn's feet. She heard the words. She processed them. Clara, daughter, protective custody. She had been doing something, holding something together for 8 months, and some internal rigging that had been bearing weight suddenly had that weight lifted off it all at once, and the sudden absence of it was almost harder than the carrying. Her jaw tightened. She pressed her back teeth together. "They're all right," she said. Her voice came out even. She didn't know how. "They are," Hendricks said. "They're going to be all right." She nodded. She kept nodding for slightly longer than made sense, because she had to do something with her face while she got it back under control. Caleb was watching her. She felt his eyes, but she didn't look at him, because if she looked at him right now, she was not going to be able to hold herself together, and she had not cried in front of anyone in 8 months, and she was not going to start. "Mr. Morgan," Hendricks said, "I'm going to need a formal statement from you and from Miss Hart. You'll need to come into Cheyenne at some point. But I want you to know what you detailed in that letter, and what Miss Hart corroborated. This is the most complete accounting we've had of this operation. There are 7 other women we believe were moved through this network. Your information is going to help us find them." Caleb said, "Tell me what you need and when." Hendricks outlined the requirements. He drank the coffee Evelyn made on automatic hands and mind operating on separate tracks, and he rode back down the mountain by mid-morning with a promise to return within the week with the formal paperwork. When the sound of his horse faded, the yard went quiet. Caleb was standing near the rail. Evelyn was standing near the door to the cabin. She pressed her hand flat against the doorframe. "Clara," she said. It came out barely as a word. She's safe, Caleb said. I know, she said. I heard him. She pressed harder against the doorframe. I know. He crossed the yard. He didn't say anything. He stopped beside her, not touching, just present, which was exactly what she needed. Because if he touched her, she was going to fall apart. And she had decided long ago that falling apart was something she didn't do. You can, he said quietly. She looked at him. Can what? Whatever it is you're holding, he said. You can put it down. There's nobody here. She shook her head. Evelyn. Don't, she said, but her voice cracked on it. Just at the end, just a fraction. It's just me, he said. She stood there with her hand on the doorframe and the summer air around her, and 8 months of held things pressing up from the inside. And she made the decision the way she made all her decisions, quickly, before she could talk herself out of it. She let go of the doorframe. She turned and put her forehead against his shoulder, and she breathed. That was all. She breathed. His hand came up and rested against the back of her head, not pressing, just present, just wait. And she stood there and breathed, and the mountain held still around them. She didn't cry. She had decided she wasn't going to cry, and she didn't. But she let herself be held. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then she straightened up. She stepped back. She put herself back together with the efficiency of long practice, and she looked at him, and he looked at her. Neither of them said anything about it. I need to finish the south bed before the afternoon gets hot, she said. I'll check the fence line, he said. They went back to work, but something had passed between them in those 40 seconds that hadn't passed before, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it lived in the cabin with them that evening, and the evening after, and it changed the temperature of the ordinary things. The passing of the coffee cup, the reaching around each other at the dry sink, the moment when they both reached for the same tool in the shed, and both pulled back and said at the same moment, Go ahead. On a Saturday morning, 16 days after Hendrix's visit, a second letter arrived via a writer from Miller's Crossing. Caleb brought it in. He handed it to her. She looked at the seal. The Territorial Marshal's Office, her name on the front in a clerk's careful hand. She opened it. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table, and she stood very still with her hands flat on the wood. What does it say? Caleb asked. She looked up. Birch's Network, she said. The federal court in Cheyenne has been petitioned to classify it as criminal conspiracy under the territorial statutes. It means, she paused, making sure she was reading it right. It means every transaction in the network is legally void, including, she stopped. Caleb was watching her. Including the one in Prospect Ridge, she said. The room went very quiet. What does that mean? She said. She said it quietly, not a challenge, a real question, because she needed to know what it meant for him, for this, for the thing that had become whatever it was. He looked at her for a long moment. It means, he said carefully, that there never was a transaction. Yes, she said. Which means you were never here under that arrangement. No, she said. I wasn't. He nodded. He looked at the table. He looked back up. Then I suppose he said that the question is whether you're here under a different one. She looked at him. Not a transaction, he said. I mean, whether you're here because you want to be here. Just that. Just you deciding. The letter was flat on the table between them. Outside, the summer light was full and clean across the meadow, and the garden was green and healthy, and 3 weeks ahead of where it had been when she arrived, and the roof on the barn was sealed and solid, and the south fence line was straight. She had built things here, with him. She had put her hands into this land, and it had given back, and she had watched a man write a letter, and send it, and wait, and not crow about it. And she had let herself be held for 40 seconds in a yard, and she had given him the name Clara, and he had written it down. She picked up the letter. She folded it. She set it on the shelf where they kept the important documents, the land papers, the seed receipts, the bill of sale from Haskell's. She put it with the things that mattered. I'm here because I want to be, she said. He looked at her. I would like, she said, choosing the words the same deliberate way he always did to continue the arrangement. On different terms. What terms? He said. Equal ones, she said. His chest rose and fell. I can work with that, he said. She nodded. She went to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Caleb, she said. Yes, he said. The boots you cleaned on the first night, she said. I didn't say anything then. I should have. You didn't need to, he said. I know I didn't need to, she said. I wanted to. She turned around. Thank you, she said. For the boots, for the letter, for all of it. He stood in the middle of the cabin with his hands at his sides and looked at her, and his face did the thing it only did in small moments when he thought no one was looking carefully enough. It softened, fractionally, briefly, like something underneath all that careful weathered surface showing through for just a second. You're welcome, he said, for all of it. She went out to the garden. He stood there for a moment in the empty cabin. Then he smiled. Not the almost smile, not the fraction. A real one, small and private there and gone before anyone could witness it. He went out to the fence line, and the mountain held them both in the full heat of the summer, as something between them moved from what it had been into what it was becoming. Equal terms turned out to be harder than either of them expected. Not because they didn't want them, because neither of them had much practice. Caleb had spent 6 years making every decision alone. Every choice about the land, the animals, the supplies, the timing of things. All of it ran through him and came out the other side, already settled before anyone else could weigh in, because there had been no one else. And Evelyn had spent 8 months in situations where her opinion was not consulted, where the correct survival strategy was to have no visible opinion at all. Between his habit of deciding and her habit of disappearing, equal terms required a constant, low-level negotiation that neither of them was naturally equipped for. It showed up in small things first. The water rotation in the garden. She'd developed a system in the first 2 weeks: beans on Monday and Thursday, potatoes Tuesday and Friday, squash on Wednesday when the soil had had time to dry between. It worked. She knew it worked because she'd been watching the plants respond. Caleb changed it on a Thursday without mentioning it. She discovered it at midday when she went to the rain barrel and found it half empty on a bean day. You watered the squash this morning, she said. Not a question. He looked up from the harness he was mending. They were drooping. They droop in the morning, she said. They recover by noon. I told you that. I know what drooping looks like, he said. And I know my rotation, she said. He set the harness down. He looked at her with the patient, slightly immovable expression he used when he thought he was right. The squash needed water. The squash needed to be left alone, she said. Overwatered squash goes soft before it's ready. I'm trying to time the harvest for August. A pause. You didn't tell me about August, he said. I didn't think I needed to plan out loud every decision I make about the garden, she said. It's my garden, he said. The moment the words were out, she watched him register what he'd said. He didn't take them back, that wasn't his way, but something shifted in his expression. She looked at him steadily. Then you water it, she said. She went inside. She heard him sit with that for a while. He came in at supper and set 2 plates on the table and said, Tell me about August. She looked at him. The harvest plan, he said. Walk me through it. She walked him through it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, All right, your rotation on the garden, I'll leave it. Thank you, she said. And in the future, he said, when you have a reason for something, say it. I'm not, he paused, looking for the right word. I'm not trying to override you. I just don't know what I don't know. She looked at him across the table. That goes both ways, she said. He nodded. It does. They ate in a silence that was slightly uncomfortable in the way that honest silences sometimes are. And then he said, The south pasture. I've been thinking of running a second fence line inside the existing one. For when we get... He stopped. She looked up. For when you get what? He'd been about to say we. She'd heard him catch it. For when I get cattle, he said carefully. If I expand the operation. She held his gaze for a moment. Tell me about the cattle plan, she said. He told her. She listened. She asked 3 questions that reordered one section of the plan into something more sensible, and he saw it immediately and said, yes, that's better. And they moved through the rest of the meal talking about fence lines and pasture rotation and winter hay storage, and by the end of it, the slight uncomfortable edge in the silence had smoothed itself out. They were learning each other's language. It was imperfect, and it required repair, and neither of them was graceful about it. But they were doing it. The first real fight came on a Tuesday. Not the garden argument. That had been friction. This was different. Deputy Hendricks had sent word that the formal statements needed to be given in Cheyenne, and the date had been set for the following week. Caleb had been organizing his notes, going back through everything he'd written in the original letter, making sure the timeline was correct. Evelyn had been preparing too, in her own way. Going through her own memory, which was considerably less organized than his notes, but considerably more detailed in its particulars. She hadn't told him everything in the letter. She'd told him about the structure, the names, the locations, the women she'd traveled with. But there were things she'd kept back. Not because they weren't relevant, because they were too close, because putting them in a document that would be read by territorial marshals and federal clerks and eventually entered into court record meant making them permanent, and she hadn't been ready for permanent. She told him she wasn't going to give the full statement. He put his pen down. What do you mean? He said. I mean, there are parts of it I'm not prepared to... Evelyn. His voice was careful, but there was something underneath the careful. If there's information that would help the case... I know what helps the case, she said. I was inside it. You heard about it secondhand and wrote a very good letter, and I'm grateful for it. But you don't get to decide what I say in my own statement. I'm not trying to decide what you say, he said. I'm trying to understand why you'd leave out... Because it's mine, she said. Her voice had gone sharp, and she didn't try to pull it back. It happened to me. My body, my experience, my memory of it. And when I decide I'm ready to make it permanent by handing it to a court, I will. But that is my decision, and not yours. The room was very quiet. You're right, he said. She had been ready for an argument. The absence of one threw her slightly off balance. I know you're right, he said. He wasn't backing down from weakness. She could hear that he was acknowledging something real. It's yours. I don't have the right to push on it. She stood with her arms crossed and waited for the but. There wasn't one. He paused. I want them to have everything they need to keep Birch where he's going. They will, she said. What I'm giving them is enough. Trust me to know my own case. I trust you, he said. Quiet and flat and completely without qualification. She uncrossed her arms. Something about the directness of it, no hesitation, no follow-up condition, no shadow of doubt in his voice, got past the place where she normally managed things to the place underneath where the real, unmanaged things lived. She sat down. There were 3 of them, she said. Not Birch. 3 men who worked for the operation in different towns. What they did... She stopped. I'll put it in the statement. Just not all the detail. The fact of it. The names, the locations. That's what matters for the case. He said nothing. He just waited. One of them is the reason for the scar, she said. Still nothing from him. Just presence and attention, and the particular quality of listening he had which was absolute, and didn't try to fill the space before she was done. He's one of the ones already in custody, she said. Hendricks told me. Good, Caleb said. One word. Flat as a stone. I need you to know that I'm not... She worked for the right shape of it. I'm not fragile about it. I know what happened, and I know what it was, and I've been living with it for a year. I'm not fragile. I know you're not, he said. But I also don't... She stopped again. I need it to stay in the category of things I handle on my own terms. I can't have it become something that people treat me differently about. That changes what they see when they look at me." He looked at her, directly, the way he always did. "How do I look at you?" he said. She thought about it. She thought about the first evening, the sack coming off his eyes on the scar, and then on the rest of her. She thought about 2 months of mornings and evenings and working days. "Like I'm somebody," she said. "Not like I'm something that happened to somebody." He was quiet for a moment. "That's how I'll keep looking," he said. She nodded. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs. "All right," she said. "I'll write the full statement, tonight, on my terms." He picked up his pen. He went back to his own notes. She sat at the other end of the table and wrote for 2 hours, and he worked on his own papers, and they didn't talk, and the lamp burned between them, and the mountain was dark outside the windows, and it was the most companionable 2 hours she'd had in longer than she could remember. Not despite the weight of what she was writing. Somehow, because of it. Because she was writing it in a room where she'd been seen as somebody, and that made it possible in a way it hadn't been before. When she finished, she set the pen down. He looked up. "Done," she said. "Good," he said. She folded the papers and didn't offer to show him, and he didn't ask. That was also equal terms. The twist came 4 days before they were due in Cheyenne, and it came from a direction she hadn't been watching. A woman rode up the mountain on a Wednesday afternoon, alone, which was unusual enough that both Caleb and Evelyn heard the single horse and came out to see. She was maybe 60, well-dressed for the territory, sitting her horse with the confidence of someone who'd been riding her whole life, and she looked between the two of them with dark, sharp eyes and said, "I'm looking for Caleb Morgan." "That's me," Caleb said. "Margaret Aldis," the woman said. "I'm the circuit judge for this territory. I've been following the Birch case with some interest." She looked at Evelyn. "You're Evelyn Hart." "I am," Evelyn said. "Good." Aldis dismounted with the ease of long practice and handed her reins to nobody in particular because she was clearly a woman who expected things to work out. Caleb took the reins. "I've come to discuss something with you both before the Cheyenne deposition, and I thought it better to come here than to have you come to me. May I come in?" They brought her inside. Caleb made coffee. Aldis sat at the table and set her gloves down and looked at the cabin with the appraising eyes of someone who noticed everything. "I want to speak plainly," she said. "I prefer it." "So do we," Evelyn said. Aldis glanced at her. Something in the glance was approving. "The Birch case is solid. He'll be convicted. The 2 associates who handled transport are solid cases. The man who—" She paused, her eyes on Evelyn. "The man who gave you that scar. His case is also solid. You won't need to testify against him personally. The physical evidence is sufficient." Evelyn's shoulders dropped a fraction. An involuntary release. "However," Aldis said, "there is a complication. The man Birch was working for the money behind the operation. The one your letter referenced Mr. Morgan as the Cheyenne trader, his name is Alderman Cole. He has significant political connections in the territory. He's already hired 3 lawyers, and they are aggressively contesting the conspiracy classification." "How?" Caleb said. "By attacking the credibility of the witnesses," Aldis said. She looked at Evelyn. "Including yours." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "What are they contesting?" "Your account of events," Aldis said. "They're arguing that you were a willing participant in the arrangements, that you have a personal grievance against Mr. Cole, and are fabricating the conspiracy element to damage him." She said it plainly without softening, which Evelyn appreciated. "They will make this argument in court, and they will make it loudly." "It's a lie," Evelyn said. "I know it's a lie," Aldis said. "But lies told loudly by expensive lawyers in front of the right judge can become verdicts." She paused. "Which is why I am here, rather than in my office." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "What do you need?" "I need a second corroborating witness for the conspiracy element," Aldis said. "Not for the assault, not for the transport that's all documented, for the financial chain, the money trail between Cole and Birch. Someone who saw it directly." Silence. "I saw it once," Evelyn said. "Indirectly. I was in a room and I heard figures discussed. Birch and a man I know now was Cole's representative. $1,500 for 6 months of, she stopped, of what they called procurement. I can describe the representative. Aldous was writing. Good, what else? There was a ledger, Evelyn said. Birch kept it under the seat of his wagon. Green cover, brass clasp. I don't know if they found it. Aldous looked up. They didn't find a ledger. Then it's somewhere between Prospect Ridge and wherever Birch went after he left the mountain, Caleb said. He looked at Evelyn. When was the last time you saw the wagon? 2 days before he came here, she said. Caleb stood up. He went to the shelf where he kept the land maps. He unrolled one on the table next to the coffee cups. He would have come through Miller's Crossing, he said. There's only one trail down from the eastern ridge. If he ditched the wagon anywhere between Prospect Ridge and the crossing, it would be, he pointed, here or here. These are the only 2 places with enough cover. Aldous looked at the map. She looked at Caleb. You're describing a search that would take 2 days, he said, with 2 people who know the terrain. Evelyn looked at him. I know the trail, he said. And you know what you're looking for. She turned to Aldous. If we find the ledger, she said, what does that do to the case? Cole's lawyers lose their central argument, Aldous said simply. A ledger with figures and dates and initials is not a lie told by a woman with a grievance. It's a document. Then we find the ledger, Evelyn said. They left at first light the next morning. Caleb on Cutter, Evelyn on the bay mare he'd been using for field work, and they rode down the mountain on the eastern trail and started looking. She had not been down the mountain since she came up it. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to not go down, and now that she was going, she felt it, the way the descent tightened something in her chest. The way the valley smell coming up through the pines triggered a kind of alertness in her body that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with 8 months of conditioned response. Caleb rode beside her, not ahead. She noticed that. He'd moved beside her without making anything of it, and she didn't say anything either, but she settled back into her saddle and let the alertness recede by degrees. The first location, he said. Just past the creek crossing. There's a wide spot where the trail doubles back. I remember the creek, she said. He glanced at her. He didn't say anything. They found the first wide spot and dismounted and searched for 30 minutes, working outward from the trail in a systematic grid. Nothing. Back on the horses. The second location was 2 miles further where the trail bent around a granite outcropping, and there was a shallow ravine on the downhill side thick with brush. It was the kind of place that invited things to be put and forgotten. Down in there, Evelyn said. They both saw it at the same moment. The corner of something brown and rectangular half hidden under a thicket of buckbrush about 20 feet below the trail edge. Caleb was off Cutter before she'd finished the thought. He went down the slope on his own. Sure footing pushed back the brush, reached in. He came up with a leather satchel. Inside the satchel, a ledger. Green cover. Brass clasp. He held it up. She sat on her horse on the trail above him and felt something cold and enormous move through her. Not fear, not relief exactly, but something that encompassed both of those and was bigger than either. The brass clasp caught the morning light. Such a small object, such an ordinary thing. And inside it, 8 months of evidence that she hadn't been able to speak out loud to anyone until a man with a careful way of talking had written it down for a court. Got it, Caleb said. I see, she said. He climbed back up. He handed it to her. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the battered leather, the clasp, and then she opened it. Names. Figures. Dates going back 3 years. Initials she recognized, B. For Birch, C. For Cole. And others she could cross-reference with what she remembered. The handwriting was Birch's. She recognized it from the papers he'd made her sign. Is it enough? Caleb said. Yes, she said. This is everything. They rode back up the mountain with the ledger in Caleb's saddlebag, and they didn't talk much on the way. There was nothing that needed to be said about it. They'd done what they'd gone to do, and the going and the doing had settled something between them in a way that was beyond what words were good for. Back at the cabin, she held the satchel while he stabled the horses, and then she took it inside and set it on the table and sat down and looked at it. He came in. He washed his hands at the basin. He came to the table and looked at the satchel and then at her. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm angry," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. 3 years, she said. "That ledger goes back 3 years. That means 3 years of women. 3 years of Clara and whoever was before Clara and whoever came before that." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "And Birch just put it in a satchel and threw it in a ravine, like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Caleb said. "That's why he hid it." "You know what I mean." "I do," he said. "I know what you mean." She looked at the satchel. "How do people do it?" she said. "How do they do something like this and just live with themselves?" "I don't know," he said. "I've been asking that question my whole life about one thing or another." She looked at him. "What's your one thing or another?" He was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, just precise. "When I left Ohio," he said. "When I left Thomas, I knew my brother wasn't. I knew the farm was in trouble. I knew the boy needed somebody steady, and I told myself I'd be more used to them with money from out west, told myself I'd send for them once I was settled." He paused. "I sent 2 letters, got one back. And then the winter of '80 came, and I was already 3 years gone, and the boy was—" He stopped. "You didn't kill your nephew," she said quietly. "No," he said, "but I wasn't there, and I've been deciding what to do with that ever since." "Is the cabin what you decided?" she said. He looked up. "The solitude," she said. 6 years. Is this what you decided to do with it?" A long pause. "It was the best thing I could think of," he said. "Being somewhere that required enough of me that I didn't have room to be useless." She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that this was the life he'd built, from that a cabin on a mountain, a list at the supply store, a hawk riding the updrafts, a photograph in a box in the loft. "You're not useless," she said. "I know that now," he said. He said it simply without drama, and it was the way he said it that undid her, not a revelation, not a performance, just a quiet statement of something that had recently become true. Because of her. She knew it was because of her, and he knew she knew, and neither of them was going to say it directly, but it was in the room with them, as present as the satchel on the table. She reached across and put her hand over his. Just for a moment. A second, maybe 2. Then she pulled it back. He didn't move while her hand was there, and he didn't move when she pulled it away. "We should get the ledger to Aldous," she said. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "We can ride to Miller's Crossing and send it with the postal rider." "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning." They sent it. Aldis's written response reached them 4 days later and was 3 sentences long. Ledger received. Cole's counsel has withdrawn the credibility challenge. Deposition in Cheyenne on the 14th will proceed as planned. Caleb read it first and handed it to her without comment. She read it and handed it back. "It's over," she said. "The legal part," he said. "The rest takes longer." She looked at him. "What's the rest?" He thought about it. "The part where you stop waking up listening for the wrong sound," he said. "The part where—" he paused, "where you stop measuring the distance to the door." She was very still. "I still do that," she said. "I know," he said. "Not I know as in I've been watching you, but I know as in I understand the thing you're describing. It goes away, slower than you want it to, but it goes." "Has yours," she said. He considered it honestly. "Mostly," he said. "Not all the way." She nodded. She sat with that. "What are you still measuring the distance from?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Less than I was 2 months ago," he said. She understood that. She understood exactly what he meant by it, and he knew she understood. "Less than I was 2 months ago," she said back in the same tone. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. They went to Cheyenne on the 14th. 4 hours on horseback, the longest stretch she'd ridden since arriving at the mountain, and the first time she'd been in a town of any size since Prospect Ridge. She felt the crowd sounds before she saw the crowd. Her body registered them, the old alertness, the old geometry of exit assessment, and she breathed through it and kept her spine straight. Caleb rode beside her through the main street, not ahead, not behind. She noticed again that he did this. She would not have been able to explain to anyone why it mattered as much as it did, why the particular position of beside rather than leading or trailing meant the specific thing that it meant. But it did. It meant something. The deposition was 3 hours. She gave her statement to a federal clerk and a territorial judge and 2 of Aldis's legal associates, and she said everything she'd written, and she said it in the same even direct voice she'd been using since the beginning, and when it was done, she signed her name to the document and set the pen down and stood up. They were in the hallway outside the deposition room, Caleb waiting where she'd left him when Aldis came out behind her. "Miss Hart," Aldis said. Evelyn turned. "Cole's lawyers made a formal offer this morning," Aldis said. "They're looking for a plea arrangement. Reduced charges in exchange for full financial disclosure of the network. Every account, every partner, every transaction going back 4 years. Evelyn looked at her. "What does that mean for the women?" "It means we trace the money to every piece of the network," Aldis said. "Which means we find all of them, the ones who are still in it." "And what does Cole get?" "Significantly reduced sentence," Aldis said. "He doesn't escape, but he doesn't hang." Evelyn looked at the wall. She breathed. "Is it enough?" she said. "It's the best route to finding everyone," Aldis said. "In my judgment. But it's not my judgment that matters here." Evelyn looked at Caleb. He was watching her with that absolute patient stillness. "What do you think?" she said to him. "I think," he said carefully, "that you know better than I do what the women still inside it need." She did know. She'd been one of them. She knew what it meant to be in the system, what it meant to be invisible, what it meant to be moved through the dark without anyone looking for you. "Tell him yes," she said to Aldis. "But I want Clara Beaumont and her daughter's names in the disclosure. I want them on record as victims with full legal standing, not just as incidental recoveries." Aldis nodded. She was writing. "Done. And I want the name of every woman in his ledgers given to someone who will actually look for them," Evelyn said. "Not filed. Looked for. I'll personally oversee it," Aldis said. "Then yes," Evelyn said. She signed one more document. Aldis shook her hand with the firm, brief grip of a woman who respected efficiency. She said, "You did something important today, Miss Hart," and then she went back through the door. Evelyn stood in the hallway. Caleb came to stand beside her. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You ready to go home?" She turned to look at him when he said it. The word landed somewhere unexpected. Home. She hadn't thought of any place as home since Missouri. She hadn't let herself. Home was a thing that could be taken, and she'd learned not to put it anywhere too specific. But standing in a courthouse hallway in Cheyenne, with the deposition behind her and the mountain ahead of her, she heard him say the word, and felt it settle into place like a stone finding the bottom. "Yes," she said. They rode back through the afternoon. The mountain came up ahead of them as they climbed the pines closing in the heat of the valley, giving way to the cooler, cleaner air, and she felt her whole body ease 1 degree at a time as they went up. At the top of the last switchback, when the meadow came into view, and the cabin at the edge of the tree line, she stopped her horse without meaning to. He stopped beside her. The cabin sat in the late afternoon light, solid and low. The garden green and full behind it, the barn with its sealed and steady roof to the left. 2 months of work visible and real. 2 months of herself put into something that gave back. "Caleb," she said. "Yes," he said. She was looking at the cabin, at the garden, at the life that had accumulated here in 2 months quietly and without her entirely planning it. "I grew up believing I knew what my life was going to look like," she said. "And then I learned that I didn't get to know. And then I stopped letting myself imagine it, because imagining things that don't come true is worse than not imagining them." She paused. "I stopped a long time ago." He was listening, completely. "I'd like to start again," she said. "Imagining." He was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "What do you imagine?" he said. She thought about it. She thought about it honestly, the way she always did. "The garden in September," she said. "The harvest done. The larder full. That," she looked at the cabin, "that east window, the one that faces the sunrise. I've been thinking about a chair there. For the mornings." "I can make a chair," he said. "I know you can," she said. "That's partly why I mentioned it. I." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the mountain held still around them in the gold of the late afternoon, and nothing was resolved yet, not all of it, not the deep things that took longer than 2 months, but they were both looking in the same direction, at the same cabin, at the same window with the sunrise. "Come on," he said. They rode down into the meadow together, and the summer evening came on slow and golden, and the cabin waited for them with its door closed and its roof sealed and its east window catching the last of the light. He built the chair on a Saturday. She didn't ask him to start that weekend. She'd mentioned it once on the ride back from Cheyenne in the way she mentioned most things she wanted sideways embedded in something else, leaving him room to decide. She hadn't brought it up again. That was how she operated. She said a thing once, and meant it, and left it where she'd put it. He went into the barn after breakfast, and she heard the sound of wood being worked, the rasp of the plane, the tap of the mallet, and she understood without being told what he was doing. She went to the garden and let him do it. He brought it inside at noon. Plain wood, no ornament built to last, rather than to impress, with a slight backward tilt that would make the morning light come in at exactly the angle the east window offered. He set it by the window and stepped back. She came in from the garden and looked at it. She didn't say anything for a moment. "You angled it," she said. "For the sunrise," he said. "The light comes in low this time of year. By October it'll be different, but I can adjust the—" "Don't adjust it," she said. "It's right." She sat in it. She put her hands on the arms. She looked out the east window at the meadow and the tree line and the sky above the ridge. He stood in the middle of the room and watched her sit in the chair he'd made for her, and he felt something so straightforward and so enormous that he had absolutely no language for it. So he said nothing and went back out to the barn. The last weeks of summer moved fast. She felt them moving the particular acceleration that happens when something good is present, and the animal part of you understands that all good things are temporary and starts to grieve in advance. She caught herself doing it and stopped herself doing it. Twice, 3 times. It required conscious effort. She was not accustomed to having things she didn't want to lose. The garden came in strong. Beans first, then the squash, the potatoes heavy and clean. She canned 4 days straight at the end of August, and Caleb stayed close during those days without hovering, refilling the water barrel without being asked, keeping the stove fed to the right temperature, coming in at the end of the 4th day, and looking at the shelves of sealed jars and saying simply, "That's a good larder." She'd been so tired she could barely stand, and she'd felt his words land like something solid, and she'd said, "Yes, it is," and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the jars. September came the way he'd predicted, fast, with a sharpness in the mornings that hadn't been there before. She started sitting in the east chair before full light, wrapped in the rough blanket from the cot, watching the sunrise come over the ridge, drinking her coffee in the particular silence of a day that hasn't started yet. He found her there one morning. He came out of his room and stopped when he saw her, and she looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Coffee's on?" she said. He poured a cup. He came and stood near the window. Not in the chair, there was only one, but near it. Near her. "How long have you been up?" he said. "An hour," she said. "Maybe more." "Are you sleeping?" he said. Better, she said. Not the way I used to, but better. She looked at the ridge. I woke up last night and the first thing I thought was not, I didn't calculate the exits. He was quiet. That's the first time in 8 months, she said, that I woke up in the night and didn't do that. He drank his coffee. He stood with his shoulder against the wall and looked out the window beside her. You didn't lock the barn last Tuesday, she said. He looked at her. I know, he said. I noticed when I was halfway to the fence line, and I thought about going back, and then I thought... He paused. I thought it's probably fine. And it was. 6 months ago, you would have gone back, she said. 6 months ago, I would have gone back twice, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Both of them understanding the same thing without needing to name it, that healing was not dramatic, that it didn't arrive in a single moment. It arrived in unlocked barn doors and unreached for exits and mornings where the first thought was coffee instead of escape. Caleb, she said. Yes, I want to tell you something and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He set his cup down on the windowsill. He turned to face her fully. All right, he said. She looked at her hands around the cup. She looked up. When I was on that wagon in Prospect Ridge, she said, I had decided something. I'd been deciding it for about 2 weeks before that. I'd been in that situation long enough to understand that the situations didn't end, they just changed, and I was... She stopped. Breathed. I was very tired. And I had decided that if the next situation was bad enough, I wasn't going to keep deciding to survive it. The room was absolutely silent. And then you walked through the crowd, she said, and I couldn't see you because of the sack. But I heard you, the way you walked, the particular sound of it. And then you said 50, and the crowd went quiet, and you got up on that wagon and you said easy, and I... She stopped again. Something changed. I didn't know what you were. I didn't know if you were better or worse. But something changed. He was not moving. He was barely breathing. By the time we got up the mountain, she said, I had undecided, what I'd decided before. I hadn't done that in 2 weeks, and I almost didn't notice until later. She looked at him. I'm telling you, because you should know, that that's what you walked into, and that what you did and what you kept doing, it mattered in ways that are bigger than I know how to say. He looked at her for a long time. His jaw moved. He said, I'm glad you told me. That was all. 3 words. But the way he said them, the weight he put behind them, the absolute directness, no performance, no deflection, was everything. I'm also telling you, she said, so that you understand why I'm... She searched for the word, why I'm slow. About some things. It's not that I don't know what I feel. I know very clearly what I feel. It's that I'm still learning that feelings don't have to be managed before they're allowed out. He looked at her with those dark eyes. Take your time, he said. I know I can, she said. That's part of why I could tell you. He picked up his cup from the windowsill. He drank. He looked out the east window at the morning coming over the ridge. Evelyn, he said. Yes, I'm slow too, he said. About some things. It's not... He paused, choosing carefully. It's not that I don't know either. I've known for a while. I just built my life around not saying things until I was sure they were the right things to say. She looked at him. Are you sure? She said. Getting there, he said. She almost smiled. She held it, but just barely. All right, she said. Get there. He looked at her. And he did the thing with his face. The thing that was usually so controlled, so held, and this time he let it go. He let her see it. The whole of it, the warmth and the certainty and the particular quiet, enormous thing that had been building in him since a woman stood straight in the mud with her hands bound and her head covered, and he had thought, I cannot watch what happens next. I will, he said. She turned back to the window. She let out a breath she'd been holding for quite some time. Outside, the ridge was burning gold. The trouble came back from below on a Thursday morning 8 days later, and it came in a form neither of them had expected. Not Birch, not Foley, not anyone connected to the network. It was a man named Howard Stritch, and he came with a document. He rode up the mountain mid-morning, a soft-looking man in a clerk's suit, badly out of place on horseback, and he pulled up at the rail with the careful posture of someone who knew he was delivering something unwelcome and had decided professionalism was the best armor. Caleb came out of the barn. Evelyn came from the garden. "Mr. Morgan," Stritch said, "I represent the estate of a Mr. Leonard Cole." "Cole's in federal custody," Caleb said. "Yes, sir. However, prior to his arrest, Mr. Cole filed a legal claim against this property." Stritch held out a document. "Based on a deed he claims predates your own." Caleb did not take the document. "Let me see it," he said. Stritch handed it over. Caleb read it. His face was completely still. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. The language was dense and legal, but the core of it was clear enough. A man named Cole was claiming that a deed filed in 1881, 2 years before Caleb had registered his own land claim, gave him prior right to the eastern 300 acres of the Morgan homestead, which included the cabin, the barn, and the garden. "This deed is fraudulent," she said. She looked up at Stritch. "The filing date is October 1881. I know that because I saw Birch's ledger. Cole's operation didn't start acquiring territorial land claims until 1883. This document didn't exist in 1881. Stritch blinked. "Ma'am, I'm only serving the—" "Where was this deed filed?" she said. "The Territorial Land Office in—" "Which clerk?" she said. Stritch opened his mouth, closed it. "Because Judge Aldous," she said, "is currently overseeing the full disclosure of Cole's financial and legal dealings as part of the plea agreement, which means every document connected to Cole's name is under federal review right now." She took a step forward. "Which means that if you file this claim, you will be submitting a fraudulent deed to a court that is actively looking for fraudulent deeds connected to this man's network, and the clerk who notarized it and you yourself will be subjects of that investigation." Stritch had gone slightly pale. "I'd suggest," Caleb said from behind her very quietly, "that you ride back down and consult your client about whether he wants to add land fraud to his current situation." Stritch took the document back. He left. Caleb and Evelyn stood side by side at the rail and watched him go. "That was—" Caleb started. "The ledger," she said. "I memorized it. The dates and figures. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure I'd need it." He looked at her. "You memorized it." "I had it in my hands for 5 minutes," she said. "I read fast." He looked at her for a long moment. "Evelyn Hart," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are the most—" He stopped. He looked for the word. He didn't find one that was adequate, so he just shook his head slightly. "I know," she said. He laughed. A real one, not the low private sound she'd heard before, but a full one, short and startled and genuine, and it landed in her chest like the last beam going into a roof, like something becoming complete. She laughed too, because she couldn't help it, because he was laughing, and it was a sound she hadn't known she could be given, and now that she had it, she understood what she'd been missing without knowing she'd been missing it. They stood at the rail in the September morning and laughed at a retreating clerk, and the mountain held them, and it was the first time in a very long time that laughing didn't feel like something that needed a reason. The letter from Aldous arrived 2 weeks later and was longer than the previous ones. Evelyn read it at the table, while Caleb was still finishing his coffee, and by the 3rd paragraph her hand was flat on the page, and she was not entirely in control of her face. "What is it?" he said. She looked up. "Cole's financial disclosure," she said. "They traced the network." She paused. 23 women. They identified 23 women across the territory who went through the operation. They've located 19 of them. She looked back at the letter. "Clara Beaumont and her daughter have been relocated to family in Iowa. They're—" She pressed her hand against the letter. "They're going to be all right." Caleb set his cup down. She read on. Her eyes moved down the page. Aldous is recommending me for a witness commendation from the Territorial Marshal's office, she said. For the testimony and the ledger. You should get it, he said. She set the letter down. She sat with it for a moment. 23, she said. 19 found, he said. And they're still looking. I know, she said. I know they are. She looked at the table. When I was on that wagon, I thought I was so certain I was invisible, that I had stopped existing in any way that mattered to anyone, that I was just being moved from one dark place to another, and no one anywhere was going to... She stopped. 23 women. And whatever I said in that deposition, and whatever I saw in that ledger, it's reaching all of them. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at him. You wrote the first letter, she said. That's where this started. You. You gave me the names, he said. That's where this started. She shook her head. It started when you stepped through a crowd in Prospect Ridge for no good reason. I had a reason, he said. A woman standing straight, she said. Yes, I know. She held his gaze. It was a good reason. He looked at her. Come for a walk, she said. I want to go up to the cave. He looked at her, slightly surprised. She'd never asked to go before, though he'd told her about it twice. She'd filed it away in the category of things to do when she was ready. Now, he said. Now, she said. They went up through the trees on the north face, Caleb leading on the path he knew, and she following close. And the September air was sharp and clean, and the light came through the pines in long cathedral angles. He brought her through a break in the rock face she never would have found on her own, and into the cave, which was smaller than she'd imagined and smelled like cold stone, and something older than anything she had a name for. He showed her the drawings. She stood in front of them and looked. Animals mostly rendered in a style so spare and direct that they communicated across whatever gap of years existed between her and the hands that had made them. An elk, a horse, or something like one. Birds. And the two figures, just shapes, just marks, but undeniably standing side by side. She looked at them for a long time. How long ago? She said. I don't know, he said. Long. They were here, she said, on this mountain, standing in this cave, and they made something that lasted. Yes, he said. She turned around and looked at him in the cave light. I'm going to stay, she said. I know, he said. I mean, permanently, she said. I'm not going to go to Iowa or to Cheyenne or anywhere else. I want to be here. I want to... She stopped. She made herself say it directly. I want to build something here, with you, that lasts. He was looking at her with that full, unguarded thing on his face that he'd let her see at the window. He wasn't holding it back. Then stay, he said. I want that. I want exactly that. She took one step toward him. He met her the other half of the way, which was the most natural division of distance she'd ever been part of. And she put her hand on the side of his face, and he put his hand over hers. And they stood like that in the cave with the old drawings on the wall and the mountain breathing around them. She kissed him, or they kissed each other. There was no clear first, which she found later to be the most accurate way to describe everything between them. No clear. First, no clear leader, just two people moving the same direction at the same time. It was brief, and it was certain, and it was the kind of thing that had been building its weight for long enough that when it finally arrived, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like a confirmation. They rode back down to the cabin in the afternoon, and there was nothing dramatically different about any of it, except that everything was different about all of it, and they both understood this, and neither of them needed to narrate it. He made supper. She set the table. He passed her the bread, and their hands were near each other on the table for a moment, and neither of them moved away. The cattle, she said. He looked up from his plate. The second fence line, she said. For the south pasture. When you're ready to do it, I want to help plan it. You want to be involved in the cattle decision, he said. I want to be involved in all of it, she said. That's what staying permanently means. He looked at her across the table, the lamp between them, the sealed larder on the shelves behind her, the east chair at the window where the morning light would come over the ridge in a few hours. Then you're involved in all of it, he said. All right, she said. All right, he said. She pressed her lips together. You realize we're going to fight about half of it. Probably more than half, he said. And you're all right with that. I'm looking forward to it, he said. She stared at him. You are not. I genuinely am, he said. You're the most interesting argument I've ever had. She did smile then. She didn't hold it back. Caleb Morgan, she said. Evelyn Hart, he said. You underpaid, she said. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, that rare, full, unguarded thing. I know, he said. I knew that the first morning. She shook her head. She picked up her fork. They ate. Outside, the September night came down over the mountain, and the stars appeared one at a time over the eastern ridge, and the meadow was still and dark, and the cabin held its light against the dark, the way it had been built to solid weathered, made to last. In the morning, she sat in the east chair before sunrise. The blanket around her shoulders, the cup in her hands, the ridge going from black to gray to the first pale gold. She heard him in the kitchen, the sound of the stove, the particular knock of the coffee pot being set to heat. She had not had a morning like this in 4 years. A morning where the sound in the next room was a person she'd chosen and who had chosen her, and where the day ahead was something to be built rather than survived. She pressed her palms against the arms of the chair he'd made for her. She let herself feel all of it. The warmth of the cup, the cold of the morning, the light coming over the ridge steady and unhurried, the same as it had been coming for longer than anyone alive could account for. She let herself feel the enormity of being here in this chair, on this mountain, after everything that had come before. He came in with a second cup and set it on the windowsill beside her without a word. She reached up and touched his hand. He turned his hand and held hers for a moment in the early light. Then he went back to the stove, and she heard him starting breakfast, and the ridge outside the east window turned from gold to full morning. And Evelyn Hart sat in the chair that had been made for her and watched the day arrive. She had decided on a wagon in Prospect Ridge to stop surviving. She had decided wrong, because what came after surviving was this: the chair, the window, the hand that held hers in the cold morning, the mountain that asked everything of you and gave everything back. And it was not a small life, or a safe life, or a life without its weight, but it was hers completely and finally, and without reservation, and she was going to live every last day of it.